Dear all, this presentation is actually intended for the delegates who were attending this MPS National Clinical Trial Summit 2023, where I am going to discuss about some regulations in India and international which govern clinical research. But that particular talk, which I was going to deliver on 5th of August, that is a 20-minute slot. So I have to discuss a summarized format of this particular presentation. So in details, I had prepared this discussion, this lecture, and at the onset, I want to thank Professor Shiv Prakash N, President of our Medical Pharmacologist Society and Professor of Pharmacology from a very distinguished medical college in Bangalore. So first of all, thank you, Professor Shivamurthy N, for giving me this opportunity to deliver this topic. And maybe for next 1 hour, we'll try to cover this broad area. So our session learning objectives will be to comprehend the Indian regulatory framework for clinical trials, to explore the international regulations, especially in Europe and America, for clinical research, and also we'll try to understand the accelerated approval pathway and emergency use authorization. So first, to begin with, when we talk about guidelines versus regulation, it is important to understand the difference between these two. First of all, in general, we all know that we should wear helmet while riding a scooter. And that is a general guideline. But when we are talking about regulation, that means if I am not wearing helmet, the police person is going to fine me. So a guidance or guideline is a recommendation on how something should be performed. But regulation means this is a law dictating how something must be performed. So we will discuss today about some important regulations governing clinical research. And when we talk about regulations and guidelines in India, we need to appreciate these two esteemed bodies, CDSCO, which give us the regulations, and we all know the Drug Controller General of India, the highest chair of CDSCO, and according to that, they are providing us the regulations, and ICMR is the apex institute in India who are providing us guidelines by which we can conduct clinical research. And if we go by 1940s or 1945, the journey with guidelines and regulations starts in India. So this is the Drugs and Cosmetic Act, which is a regulation and drug and cosmetic rules. So this was followed until 2005. We have the Schedule Y amendment. And along with that, in 2001, we have the guideline of Indian Good Clinical Practice by CDSCO, and that is a guideline. And when we talk about ICMR, the first time ICMR came up with ethical guidelines for conducting clinical research in 2000, which had a revision in 2006, and even to conduct efficiently the stem cells research and therapy, ICMR and the Department of Biotechnology had came up with guideline for the first time in 2007, which had a revision on 2013. And in 2017, we have the national guidelines for stem cell research. This is the national ethical guidelines for biomedical and health research involving human participants. And we all know this document helps us to conduct different types of public health research, social and behavioral science research. Also, this particular guidelines, these documents helped us to conduct research during humanitarian emergencies and disasters. Few important points like informed consent process, biological materials, how to store, biobanking, data security, and vulnerability. These have been expanded into different separate sections in this particular guideline documents. And this is the latest guideline what we have for clinical research in 2017. ICMR also came up with a national ethical guidelines for biomedical research involving children. This is something again unique and very helpful for those who want to do clinical research in pediatric population. Specifically, this guideline had clearly tell us the assent and informed consent procedures. Like for an example, when we have research participants with age between 7 to 11 years, we need to take oral assent in the presence of parent. In the 12 to 18 years, the written assent required. And when we are talking about verbal assent, that also needs parental confirmation. When children becomes more than 12 years, 13, turning 13, already the patient had given oral consent, but this is the time we need to take the written assent in addition. So for clinical trials also, the CDSCO guidelines, this assent should be followed like this way. Apart from this, there are lots of guidances which we can get from this wonderful document prepared by ICMR. And this came up during the April 2020, just the wave of COVID-19 pandemic. had arrived at the seashore of India. The ICMR came up with this guideline for ethics committee how to react during COVID-19 pandemic. The most important ethos was that research must not suffer due to COVIDization. And that was also a great step taken by ICMR. This is an interesting data, but we can see here, the green line represents Southeast Asia, and we will show you how the Southeast Asia, there are constant increase in the number of clinical trials after 2015. And in the Southeast Asia zone, the India was the most contributor in terms of clinical trial numbers. And we are really proud of that. So after US, China, Japan, India has the maximum number of clinical trials conducted as per WHO. And if we see the 10-year trend from 2011 to 2020, it was found that this was increased, like from the 2014, you can see the slope is increasing, and to 2019, it was 11% of all global trials. India was sharing the number of clinical trials. Yes, due to COVID, there was a drop. But as we had seen in previous slide, even after 2021, it again go up and it reaches some plateau. Whereas the other countries like Europe, like America even, there was a drop after pandemic. Here we can see, I think I need to show you through the arrow. Yeah. So you can see the drop in the developed countries. But in India, the green line, it is not dropping. Even after COVID, it increased and it reaches a plateau stage now. Here also you can see the lower middle income group countries. In India, there is a, because India is the maximum contributor in this particular group, there is a steady rise now. So after 2016, there is something happened in India which foster clinical trials. So India has accounted 8.3% share of global clinical trial activity in 2020, registering an increase when compared with the last 10-year average of the 6.2% share according to this global data. Someone may ask, what is the cause? The reason behind this may be this beautiful decision by our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, bringing this new drug and clinical trial rule 2019, which had changed the whole game. And there were some landmark decisions which improve the easiness of doing clinical trial in India. Now, when we are talking about experimental study and observational study, it is important whether as an investigator I am assigning exposures or not. If I am assigning exposures, then it is experimental study. But if I am not assigning the exposures, then it will be observational study. So I am assigning exposures, the research participants who will be in group A and who will be in group B. That decision will be decided by me. It could be by randomized allocation, that is a separate issue. But for being participated in a specific clinical research, if that particular clinical research, for that particular clinical research, the exposure is assigned, which type of treatment the patient will get, that is decided, then it will be an experimental study. But as an investigator, if I am not assigning the exposures, I am just observing the treatment is given as per the day-to-day care, as per the treating physician. I am just observing the effect. It is not due to participating in a clinical research, the choice of treatment changed or choice of treatment decided, then we can call it as observational study. So for experimental study, if the allocation is randomized, then it is randomized control trial. If it is not, then it is non-randomized control trial. And for observational study, if there is some comparator group, then it will be an analytical study. Otherwise, it will be a descriptive study. For analytical study, we need to know about the direction. If I am going forward from exposure to outcome, then that is a cohort study. If I am going back from outcome to exposure, that is a case control study. And if I am taking a snapshot, exposure and outcome, we are taking at the same time, then that is a cross-sectional study. I think we all know about these differences between experimental study and the observational study. Now, if we want to do some experimental study in India, we need to follow this guideline, this regulation rule, New Drug Clinical Trial Rule 2019 thoroughly. And if for all practical purpose, we want to do this observational study, we need to follow our ICMR guideline. The latest is 2017. So I think all of us will be very clear about this. Yes, there will be some cross-reference. Like in the New Drug Clinical Trial Rule, there are certain areas where they will mention, now you have to follow this ICMR 2017 guideline. So that is something we need to know. But for all practical purpose, if I am doing experimental research, the clinical trial, we need to follow this NDCTR 2019, New Drug Clinical Trial Rule 2019. And in case of observational study, we need to follow ICMR 2017 guideline. There are certain overlap that is there, and that time we need to follow according to our need. So as we are talking about regulation for clinical research, we will be confined to clinical trial. So when we are talking about clinical trial, That is defined as our new drug clinical trial rule 2019 as any systematic study of a new drug or an investigational new drug in humans to generate data for discovering or verifying its clinical, pharmacological, that includes both pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic, or adverse effects with the objective of determining its safety, efficacy, or tolerability. So this is the definition given by our regulation. And when we are talking about clinical trial, we need to know about this picture, this game by which a drug development happened. So which start with some non-clinical development or preclinical development. There is a discovery or screening phase. We all know how the new chemical entities of around 5,000 to 10,000 in number can give ultimately one or two approved drugs. And that is a quite a long process. And we can see this area again. I am just showing you this zone where we need to apply for permission to do clinical trial. So here, when we are talking about this area, already new drug application is there. But in this zone, we are applying for a investigational new drug. So here we are applying for IND, investigational new drug. Already the animal testing done, toxicology study done on animals, and all the chemicals tests had been done. So those data were submitted to the regulators for investigational new drug application, IND application. Now, if the regulators think this IND application is okay, they will give us the permission. Then we are going forward for clinical trials. And that is again the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. Now, after doing the phase 3 clinical trial, all the data we have, we are again providing to our regulators. And that regulatory submission is known as NDA. That means new drug application. So here it is IND, and here it is new drug NDA. So here it is NDA, here it is IND. So when the regulators will check the NDA and they will think, yes, it's okay, they will give the approval and that drug will come into the market. And after that, the phase 4 trials need to be done along with post-marketing surveillance. So either post-marketing surveillance or phase 4 trials. So we will discuss in details in India how the phase 4 trials and post-marketing surveillance, they are different. And when we are talking about generic drugs, they do not require whole this game, these trials, they don't require. So here they will apply for ANDA. That means abbreviated new drug application. And after this abbreviated new drug application, the regulator will check the data like dissolution study data, of course the other chemistry part. There are certain chemistry part for generics we will discuss little in later, and of the results from the BAB study, bioavailability and bioequivalent studies, and they will give the permission for marketing the generic drugs. They will give the approval for generic drugs. So I think this is a very important issue. And someone may see the animal testing. There are certain animal testings, specifically the long-term safety, like mutagenesis study, sometimes the reproductive toxicology study. The regulators tell to continue for long duration. So side by side, along with the clinical trials, animal testing will also become continued. So there could be a question like that. The examiner may ask you whether the animal studies are to be considered as only preclinical or non-clinical studies under the non-clinical study banner. So I think the answer should be, it should be non-clinical, under the non-clinical study banner. Why? Many times the animal testing can be done during the duration of the ongoing clinical trials. So it is not preclinical always. So even when a clinical trial is ongoing, there are certain drug development process where they will do the animal testing. So that is very important. We need to answer like this. So animal testing is not always preclinical. It is sometimes even after the clinical drug development, but even during the clinical drug development, the sponsor can do animal studies, specifically the long-term studies. Now, when we talk about these clinical trials, we need to know the role of sponsor, how they are connected to regulatory authority. Regulatory authority means the central licensing authority agency, like in India it is CDSCO, and how they will appoint investigator. And when they appoint investigator, what should be the connection between the investigator, sponsor, and site administrator? Because the clinical trial needs some specific site, and for that particular site, there is some site administrator. There are certain rules from contact research organization, SMOs, that is site management organizations, and how they will facilitate clinical trial. That is important. And the investigator need to apply to the institutional review board or independent ethics committee, IEC, to get the permission to conduct clinical trials. So that is another important aspect. The IRB, IEC, they have a connection with site administrator. So this all relationship is very important, very critical. We need to know when we are conducting clinical trials, when there is some adverse effect happened, the serious adverse event in clinical trial, we do not use this term as adverse effect. We call it as adverse event. Why? Because we are not here to determine the causality like what we are doing post-marketing causality assessment. I think that is a separate issue, huge chapter we can discuss in some later days. But this relationship, when subject will feel there is some issue, they will also inform the investigator. And there is also a provision that subjects can contact directly with IEC or IRB regarding any concerns with this clinical trial. And in informed consent document, it is important to provide the number, contact details of member secretary of the institutional ethics committee, independent ethics committee or institutional review board. And again, they will when there is some SAE, serious adverse event, the IRB or ISC can need to directly communicate with the CDSCO, regulatory authority. So this relationship we need to understand. And I think you can have another separate lecture that is also provided in this particular same channel. You can find where we discuss about the roles of different stakeholders in clinical trials. You can just check in this particular channel, you will find there we discuss it in details. But here I want to address this issue, the role of subjects and the importance of subjects, how they can be the stakeholders in clinical trials. So when we are talking about responsibilities of key stakeholders in clinical trials, we all need to know and acknowledge wholeheartedly, we do research for the people, and that should be with the people, not on the people. So that is the role of the subjects in a clinical trial. Now let's discuss a few important aspects. I think many of us know about this incidents when a 6-month-old baby suffering from some rare disease, rare genetic disease, spinal muscular atrophy type 1. And this Zolgensma trial was also being conducted, which cost rupees 16 crore. So what happened? There are certain kids from India who got this therapy on compassionate ground through a global lottery. But this babies was not that lucky, but get the funding from the crowds, luckily. And also our government had waived taxes of rupees 5 crore to facilitate the import of this particular drug. And ultimately, the baby got the injection. But why I am mentioning here, there are lots of clinical trial ongoing on this rare disease. Global clinical trial is ongoing. This particular study is suggesting there is a very less representation from India and other low-income countries who are not directly part of such trials. So there is a need of having a global platform to also have this type of orphan drug trials in India. And we are really appreciating the new changes that happened in NDCTR by this NDCTR, New Drug Clinical Trial Rule 2019, to foster research and development of orphan drugs. So first of all, we need to know about what is orphan drugs. So orphan drugs are those drugs to treat rare disease. So as per our regulation, what is rare disease? If we are in our country, less than 5 lakh population is there affected by a particular disease. So that disease is rare disease. So the drugs intended to treat conditions affecting fewer than 5 lakh, they are the orphan drug. So what are the favorable provisions for orphan drugs made by the NDCTR 2019? Number one, they have some special status and recognition, expedited approval process, and most importantly, complete clinical trial filing fee waiver. So there is some expedited evaluation procedure, accelerated approval, even if all phases of clinical trials are incomplete, but they are also need to be emphasized on those post-marketing studies. Another issue. This is again a trial, safety and immunogenicity trial of a COVID-19 vaccine, where we were also a part from School of Tropical Medicine, and Professor Shantanu Tripathi, our head guide, my guide was there as a PI. So what happened? They give 2 doses of this vaccine to all the participants, but issue arise when there is a concept of precautionary dose of COVID-19 vaccine. So our participants were anxious because they want to get the shot of a precautionary dose, and there was no clear-cut guidance whether they can take this particular vaccine as a precautionary dose, or they need to be provided the already existing vaccines like our Covaxin or Covishield. So there were some confusions, and all the vaccine center who are providing this precautionary dose, they were not that much well known about these vaccine trials. So they were initially refusing to provide that mixed method. What I am telling, I want to bring your attention here. We often do clinical trial, but what happens when the trial ends? Though this is not that a huge issue because this is only 1 dose. But what happened with our diabetic patients who are taking some drugs for a long time, and we are including them into 1 clinical trial of a particular anti-diabetes drug, and that drug is giving them immense benefit. But at the same time, when the trial is finished, if we are trying to stop that particular drug, that arises some question on our ethics. And again, this time, this new drug clinical trial rule 2019 had addressed this complicated issue of post-trial access holistically. It guarantees continued access to the investigational drug after the clinical trial, provided its benefits the trial subject and is deemed necessary by the both investigator and ethics committee. So there is again a role of ethics committee too, not only the investigator. If they are thinking this is necessary, this should be provided to the trial subjects. But there are certain unanswered area when we are talking about this post-trial access, which needs attention of our regulators. Number one, the duration of post-trial access. If I am talking about diabetes, how long the patient will be provided? Whether our guidelines clarify this post-trial access for chronic diseases which requires long-term treatment. Specifically, we need there the uninterrupted access. Yes, the safety signal monitoring should be there to safeguard trial subjects' well-being, outline the responsibilities of sponsors, investigators, and also the ethics committee in recording and reporting the safety issues, even during the post-trial access. And obviously, the cost-free access, which emphasize the importance of providing this post-trial access at no cost, ensure equitable access to the treatment. But there are important questions here. Whether sponsors should continue the post-trial access after the drug receives marketing authorization and becomes commercially available. Because when the patient is in clinical trial, so the drug whichever manufactured, that was for clinical trial only. But when it becomes marketed, authorized for marketing, so that time it is not for clinical trial, for marketing, for all people in general. And we all know that to prepare, to manufacture drugs for clinical trial, regulatory clinical trial, those manufacturing should be scrutinized, should be monitored by directly the CLA, Central Licensing Authority, like in India in CDSCO. But when we have already the approval for marketing authorization, then the onus is on the state regulatory agencies, the state drug regulators. So there is some issues because we cannot provide a drug for clinical trial approval to patients when they are already available in the market, and that has some separate level. So that needs to be understood, need to be dealt carefully. And though there is an attempt in this NDCTR 2019 to remove some clouds, but we have many more questions which need attention and address by our regulators. We are waiting in the future for this. Now, again, this is a very good trial in the field of diabetes, and I think this study helped all of us a lot while we are managing our COVID patient who needs high dose of steroids. So this is a study compare two protocols in the management of glucocorticoid-induced hyperglycemia among hospitalized patients. Now, this is another study. Now, dulaglutide is available in India, but when it was not available in India, so our cardiovascular outcome trials was being conducted in India too. We know the landmark rewind study. Again, that is an anti-diabetic agent. So now the question is, What is the difference between these two trials? We need to understand the first trial, what we had shown, they were seeing the difference of two protocols already available in India, and same drug that is already approved in India. But here, the dulaglutide was not approved. They were, and also the regulators want to see the effect. So this is a regulatory trial, whereas the first trial, this trial, where they are comparing two protocols, that is not a regulatory trial, that is an academician initiated clinical trial, or we can say academic. This is academic clinical trial. This is regulatory clinical trial. So, investigating the efficacy of a novel diabetes management protocol in a hospital setting, then it is an academic clinical trial. But if I want to see efficacy of a novel anti-diabetic agent in a hospital setting, a phase 3 clinical trial, that is a regulatory clinical trial. We need to understand that. So academic clinical trial can be done only for approved drugs. And this should be initiated by investigator, academic or research institute, can be also conducted for new indication, new route, new dosage form. These results will be only utilized for the academic and research purpose, not for commercial purpose. This data cannot be used for seeking approval in any country. And sometimes EC may be confused because as an investigator, we need to approach to the EC directly. And if EC will give permission, we can move forward to the to conduct the clinical trial, academic clinical trial. But sometimes EC may be confused. They may actually need to know about whether this will be a clinical trial or rather it could be a regulatory clinical trial. So to seek clarity, they will apply to the CLA. Here it is CDSCO. And this central licensing authority must respond in 30 days. If it is not, then we have to think, the EC need to have to think that no approval is needed from the CLA. But it is important to note, medical management and compensation should be applicable as per the ICMR guidelines for biomedical research on human participants. So academic clinical trials are required to be conducted in accordance with clinical trial protocol approved by the EC and ethical principles specified in the ICMR guideline. So this is very important to note. Now, when we are talking about again the clinical trial phases, we all know what happened in phase 1 to phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trial, where we know about the efficacy of a drug. And after that when we apply for the new drug application, NDA, and we got the permission, the licensing, then we need to do the phase 4 clinical trial. So here I'm giving you two examples. Safety and effectiveness of empagliflozin in Japanese patients with type 2 diabetes, interim analysis from a post-marketing surveillance study. So here, this is post-marketing surveillance study, and I am just want to focus here this 3-year prospective observational multi-center PMS. And this will tell us about the safety and effectiveness of empagliflozin in Japanese clinical practice. So when we talk about post-marketing surveillance study, and then we can again emphasis on these points, prospective observation. But again, same molecule, empagliflozin effectively lowers liver fat content in well-controlled type 2 diabetes. A randomized double-blind phase 4 placebo-controlled trial. Here we can see this is a phase 4 placebo-controlled trial. So this is not post-marketing surveillance. The study had been conducted post-marketing, but this is phase 4 clinical trial. And again, please note the randomized double-blind phase 4 placebo-controlled trial. So we need to know about phase 4 trials. This is according to our new drug clinical trial rule. It should be, we know about this is a post-approval conducted. These trials conducted post-approval. And as we are taking large number of population, we can identify less common adverse reactions too. Cost and drug effectiveness can be evaluated here also. Pharmacoeconomic studies can be done. And pre-marketing studies, we know about the limitations in detecting rare adverse drug reactions. So phase 4 or post-marketing trial of new drugs performed after approval of the drug. But please note here, this should be related to approved indication. So the primary indication is already approved, no new indication. Such trials go beyond the prior demonstration of the drug's safety, efficacy, and dose definition. So we can check the liver fat, how it is reduced. It includes also additional drug-drug interaction, dose response, or even larger safety studies. This is designed to support use under the approved indication, how they are going to give us benefit in terms of mortality, morbidity, and also some specific epidemiological interventions. But this ambiguity in the definition, that is important. The new drug clinical trial rule 2019, they told us that phase 4 study would include studies related to drug-drug interaction, dose response or safety studies, and trials designed to support use under the approved indications. Ethical aspects for protection of rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects should be followed. Here also we need to provide the compensation in case of clinical trial related injury or death. And the study drugs provided to the trial subject free of cost in such studies. But what happened in case of post-marketing surveillance, because that is not clinical trial, so their drugs to be provided or not, that is totally discretion of the applicant. It is not mandatory that we need to provide the drug. As per the prescribing information, we can have the design, and this is more real world observational studies also can under this post-marketing surveillance. There is no requirement of the compensation, no fees required to the regulators. So for phase 4 clinical trial, the regulators need to do the regulators, the sponsor need to provide at 2 lakhs rupees, that is the fees for phase 4 clinical trial. So this is again very important. Approval required in case of new drug and not in case of old drug. Whether we need to ask to the central licensing authority for approval, that is totally dependent on this concept of new drug. So for new drug, we must take an approval from the CLA, but from the old drug, we can also waive these issues, but always better to check with the CDSCO if it is truly old drug or not. So in nutshell, this is the picture by which different types of trials we can conduct it. And for all practical purpose, it is important to note the clinical trials with new drugs that we need to submit to the Central Licensing Authority. There is a timeline of 90 working days for reviewing, 30 working days in case of drug is discovered and researched in India, and they will give us the permission. For old drugs, generally no approval required from the CDSCO, especially if we are doing phase 4 clinical trials also. EC approval is required. For phytopharmaceutical, that to be conducted as per the applicable rules and guidelines for new drugs, the same rule and guidelines. And when we are talking about academic clinical study, there is no approval required from the CDSCO. Only we need to take the ethics committee approval. But for all practical purpose, when it is not a clinical trial, it is a biomedical health research, that is an observational study, then we need to take the ethics committee approval. And also here we need to emphasize that ethics committee should be registered under the biomedical and health research, that is ICMR. And for clinical trials also, it is important, the EC ethics committee should be registered under CDSCO. For BAB, that is the same procedures, 90 working days for review timelines. When we talk about import of new drugs and manufacturing of new drugs, there are specific guidelines you can see here. And specifically, I am requesting you to go through the CT 18, 19, and 20 for import, and 21 and 22 for manufacturing. In the new drug clinical trial rule 2019, you can find out that. Now coming to the international field, the European Medicine Agency, or EMA. So first of all, we need to know how EMA had been prepared. There is 28 European Union member states, along with 4,500 European experts. The European Union Parliament and European Union Commissions are there, with the EMA Management Board and EMA Secretariat. By this, they are working with this coordination. They are working, and primarily their objective is to protect and promote both public and animal health. So also we need to know the EMA does not control pricing, access to medicine, advertising of medicines, patents on medicines. So all these have some different laws. Homeopathic medicines, food, they are having separate committees. So now I am just focusing on the EMA Secretariat, how they are regulating the medicines. So there are different bodies. Most importantly for us, we need to know there is a specific committee for human medicinal product. As this CHMP is extremely important for us, because through that, the drug regulations happened, maximum drug regulations happened. And when we talk about pediatric committee, they have a specific PDCO, pediatric committee, that we need to know. Apart from that, there are some orphan medicinal product committee, a separate COMP, and committee for advanced therapies and pharmacovigilance risk assessment committee. So this PDCO, pediatric committee, pharmacovigilance risk assessment committee, or PRAC, the committee for advanced therapy, CAT, and committee for orphan medicinal products, COMP, These 4 committee, they have also the patient members. Apart from that, there is a specific separate committee for herbal medicinal product and veterinary medicinal product. Are all medicines approved via EMA? No. In the European Union, there are 2 ways of getting marketing authorization for a medicine. The first way is a centralized authorization procedure via European Commission after evaluation by EMA, which results in a single marketing authorization that is valid throughout the European Union. So they require only one marketing authorization. That is valid for all countries of European Union. But along with this centralized authorization procedure, there is another procedure, that is national authorization procedures, where individual European Union member states authorize medicine for use in their own territory through 3 possible procedures. Number 1, national authorization. Number 2, MRP, that is mutual recognition procedure. And another is decentralized procedure. So when we talk about centralized procedures, European Union centralized procedures, we know about the 27 countries, and there is 27 member states along with Norway, Ireland, and Liechtenstein. The principle is single application, single evaluation, and single authorization, direct access to all those countries. So this is generally compulsory for cases like some specific biotech products like recombinant DNA technology, gene express proteins, some hybridoma and monoclonal antibodies. Also, this is for new active substance in specific therapy areas like AIDS, like cancer, neurodegenerative disorder, diabetes, autoimmune disease, other immune deficiency, viral diseases, along with orphan drugs. Optional for any other new active substances, significant innovation like therapeutic, scientific, or technical in the interest of patient at a community level. Sometimes this is also optional for the generic of centralized reference product. So that also may use the centralized procedure, mutual recognition procedure, or decentralized procedures. So medicines that are mandatory for evaluation at EMA, as already we had discussed about rare disease, HIV, cancer, neurodegenerative disorder, and diabetes, autoimmune disease, viral disease, all biotech products, gene therapy, monoclonal antibodies, plus minus any innovative products. So there is 3 steps. First of all, the step 1 is pre-submission to application. There is a communication like early advice, some reporter appointment, assessment team, then application and validation. Step 2 is assessment of the reports, list of all the questions. Here they will ask for the CHMP opinion, possibility to appeal again if there is something happened, transfer to ultimately European Union Commission. And the step 3 is decision-making procedure. So there is a timeline of 120 days for scientific evaluation, that is 210 days, and decision-making it is 67 days. So notify the EMA, request rapporteur or co-rapporteur, submit to the authority. Here the clock stop for the answer to questions, or sometimes answer to questions on oral hearing, CHMP opinion. If it is favorable, they will draft the EC decision and EC decision on the community licensing. For generic registration process, there is 2 options. One is mutual recognition procedure for products with an existing MA, marketing authorization, already marketing authorization in some part, or decentralized procedures. Here, only possible if no authorization has already been granted. So most significant difference with the mutual recognition procedure is here the consultation between different member states before the first marketing authorization issued. So here that can be possible. So this is in nutshell what happened in the mutual recognition procedure. Application to reference member set. This approval, it will take at around 210 days. Then submit to the member states. There will be this is the period of mutual recognition. And in case of serious objections, they will refer to the CMDH. Serious objections refer to the CHMP, and there will be arbitration at the CHMP. So that will also take something like 60 days for CHMP opinion and 30 days for the commission decision. And if it is approval, when they will get the national licenses granted within those member states. So this is a tricky procedure we need to know. And when we talk about decentralized procedure, this again starts from the submission of dossier to the reference member states and also the concerned member states. And when the assessment report for the comments by the CMS or RMS, they sends the consolidated list to questions to applicant. Then there will be a evaluation period, and the member states, they will see all the reports. And along with that, there is a similar thing that happened just like the previous procedures of MRR. So what is important to learn, these experts who work with this particular scientific committee, that is not only the doctors, healthcare professionals, but they are also from learned society members, some national agencies, academia, and most importantly, the patients and consumers. They are the part of this EMA scientific committee. Now, if we move towards the US, we know about the USFDA. There is two types of products. If we consider innovation drug products, as already we discussed about IND and NDA. IND means investigational new drug. When we are applying before starting the phase 1 clinical trial, and new drug application before submitting the submitting for the approval for the final product, that is the phase after doing phase 3 clinical trial, we are applying for new drug application to get the authorization, market authorization. And for generic drug products, we need to only submit this abbreviated new drug application. Now, any guess who is she? Anyone make comments in the chat box? Linked with this photo, I think now you will all understand who is she. So this is the Focomelia children, and we are talking about Frances Kathleen Oldham Kelsey. So she was the determined FDA scientist who had saved American children from this unwanted birth defect catastrophe. So this is the first picture. So even before that, when elixir of sulfonamide saga happened, lots of death happened in US. With Professor Galen, Kelsey had done a marvelous job, and US Congress helped US Congress to pass this Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Acts of 1938. And when he had joined 1960s in FDA, her first assignment was to review the application from the Nickerson Merrill Company for approval of thalidomide. And we know she had stopped the entry of thalidomide in America. The total number of people affected by the use of thalidomide during pregnancy is estimated at more than 10,000, and 40% died at or shortly after the time of birth. And by her wisdom, she had saved lots of Americans. And that is why she was also acknowledged with the highest American citizen, national citizen award by their president Kennedy. And 1962, they skip over Harris Amendment to their Food Drug Cosmetic Act. The drug regulations become more strengthened by the wisdom of Dr. Kelsey. So this is the investigational new drug, IND application. So before starting the clinical trial, you can see here how this happened. I'm not going in details. In this picture, it is self-explanatory. So application, then there will be a review by CDR. Each committees, medicinal, chemistry, pharmacological, toxicological, and statistical, they all will assess. Then safety review, whether it is acceptable for study to proceed or not. Then this all decision will help ultimately whether there is some deficiencies or studies can be ongoing. This is for new drug application. So whether again after application of new drug, whether it is fileable or not, refused to file, later issued, otherwise review by the CDR. There are different other boards like medical, pharmacology, chemistry. Advisory committee meeting will be done, biopharmaceutical, statistical, microbiology. All these groups will come together to ultimately help in decision taking of on new drug application action. And when it is generic approval, it is the abbreviated new drug application. There is a specific review by OGD or CDER itself. So there will be a review on bioequivalence, chemistry or microbiology review, labeling review, and also request for plan inspection where it is prepared, whether the bioequivalence review acceptable or not, chemistry or micro-labeling review acceptable or not. Depending on that, the NDA will be approved or not. So what is important for NDA? Just a few important points. This is a regulatory assumptions on for two things. That is, if a drug, if a generic, it is pharmaceutical equivalent and bioequivalent, we can call it as therapeutic equivalent. And when we talk about pharmaceutical equivalent, this should contain the same active ingredient, same dosage form, route of administration. They should be identical in strength or concentration, but may differ in different characteristics like shape, release mechanisms, labeling, scoring. Excipients could be different. So there will be an in vitro dissolution and in vivo bioavailability and bioequivalence study where pharmacokinetic parameters like Cmax, Tmax, and area under curve will be checked with the reference standard. And when we have BCS classification, the biopharmaceutical classification system, the class, there are 4 classes. If the permeability and solubility both high, that is class 1. If the solubility is low, that is class 2. For class 3, the permeability is low and solubility is high. And class 4 is both the permeability and solubility low. So here we need to acknowledge in USFDA, they are telling for class 1 drugs, they can be bioequivalent, but in India, EMA, in certain limits, the class 1 and class 3 can be bioequivalent. So bioequivalent study need not to be done according to the regulators. But there are certain controversies, specifically nowadays coming up with permeability studies. It was found that even this low permeability that may hamper the pharmacokinetic parameters, pharmacokinetic characteristic of particular drug. This we can see some common antidiabetic agent we can use. And like dapagliflozin, for an example, it is a class 3 drug. So some generic company can bring dapagliflozin without doing BA/BE study in India. So when we are talking about bioequivalence, it is defined as a rate and extent of absorption of a test drug do not show a significant difference from the rate and extent of absorption of the reference drug when administered at the same molar dose of the therapeutic ingredient under similar experimental condition in either a single dose or multiple dose. So this is the guideline for BA/BE according to our CDSCO, where we can know there could be a possible variance in bioequivalence. You can see the brand name drugs, generic drugs, and generic wise. So between 180 to 125. So there could be a variance. We can here clearly appreciate this is 123, it is 83, and this is the innovator. So how much the difference we can perceive, that is a possibility. And it also could translate into the therapeutic effect too. So that is why in Europe, EMA, FDA, even the Japan and Canada, they are making some narrow therapeutic index criteria for bioequivalence criteria for the narrow therapeutic index drugs. That is 90 to 111.11%, whereas in India, it is still, there is no NTI bioequivalence criteria. So this is, we can see again, if it is, this is a reference drug and this is the 80 and 125% mark. This is G2, G3, G5, G6, and G4. They all are bioequivalent generic by definition, but we can appreciate the differences between G2, G3 and reference product and G5, G6 and reference product. This is much lesser. So as we can see, they also have they do not have a statistically significant difference with the reference product. But here the G2, G3 and G4 also, they may be called as bioequivalent, but they have technically the statistically significant difference in the different pharmacokinetic parameters like Cmax, Tmax, or area under curve. That is the difference is statistically significant. They are bioequivalent, but statistically significant. These are the few examples of some drugs which should follow the narrow therapeutic index criteria according to USFDA or even EMA. Another important issue in India is that the category 2 and category 4 BCS class drugs, they need to do the bioavailability bioequivalent study. But in India, there is not only the innovator can be act as a reference product. What we can see here, some generics also can come into the reference product list. So this is quite interesting. There is no specific guidelines regarding the selection of the reference product too. In India, we need that. And that is why we are telling that if I am having a Cmax of 100% for innovator product, and now a B drug, which got 80% of Cmax. Now, if somehow the B drugs become, we don't know, if becomes the reference product, then a C drug can get a 64% of the A drug, that is the innovator drug. Because if I am the C drug, take B drug as reference product, so ultimately the 80% of the 80, that means 64. And though that is the 64% of the innovator, but that can be considered as generic in India. So this is something dicey. We need to have a proper guidelines on these issues. Now coming to few important terminology. Fast track, to facilitate the development and expedite the review of drugs to treat serious conditions and fill an unmet medical need. This designation must be requested by sponsor at any time during the drug development process. And FDA usually takes this within 60 days. So this fast track designation is for the USFDA, it is available. More frequent meetings, if it is a fast track designation, to discuss the drug's development plan and ensure the collection and appropriate data needed to support the drug approval. More frequent written communication from the FDA, like design of the proposed clinical trial, sometimes use of biomarkers, and also whether it is eligible for accelerated approval or priority review. If clinically relevant criteria are met, that also can be done. And rolling review can be also ongoing. What is breakthrough therapy? This is also important to note. To expedite the development and review of drugs intended to treat a serious condition where preliminary clinical evidence indicates that the drug may demonstrate a substantial improvement on a clinically significant endpoint that is equal to effect on irreversible morbidity or mortality or on symptoms representing the serious consequences of the disease, then that can be considered as breakthrough therapy. So how does a sponsor benefit from it? Again, all the fast track resignations will come here. Intensive guidance on an efficient drug development program, beginning as early phase 1, and also FDA commitment involving some senior managers, they will also help. So designations to be requested by sponsor, ideally it should not be no later than end of phase 2, and FDA response in 60 days. Next is accelerated approval to approve drugs for serious conditions with an unmet medical need based on maybe some surrogate endpoint. What is surrogate endpoint? A marker like a lab measurement or some radiographic image or some specific physical sign that is thought to predict clinical benefit, but it is not itself a measure of clinical benefit. And there could be some intermediate clinical endpoint, which is a measure of therapeutic effect that is considered reasonably likely to predict the clinical benefit of a drug. But here again, it is important to have a robust phase 4 confirmatory studies. So when we are talking about priority review, it is important to note when we are talking about PDUFA, that is a two-tiered review system. For standard review, FDA action within 10 months, but priority review, FDA action within 6 months. And significant improvement in safety or effectiveness. There are certain reviews like scientific medical standards for approval and quality of evidence needed to remain the same as standard review, and communication of priority review designations to sponsors within 60 days of the receipt of new drug application, or in case of biologic application. Now, what is emergency use authorization? That is again very important because of this COVID time. We know about this terminology. This is a critical authority granted to the USFDA commissioner, allows emergency use authorization during specific emergencies like public health or military threats, expedited the process to address emergencies when standard approval takes long time. So based on thorough assessment of preclinical and clinical data, considering effectiveness and benefit ratio, this FDA commissioners consults with relevant departments and secretaries before granting this UA, and information regarding UA is made public in federal registry. When we talk about UA by FDA, there is certain rules of healthcare providers to maintain detailed records of authorized medications, that allocation, that dispensing. Medications under UA must adhere to strict labeling regulations to avoid unsubstantiated claims, and informed consent forms. That is also important. What are the limitations? UA medications cannot be used in post-emergency situations, and continued use requires pursuing the FDA's conventional drug approval process. And this FDA retains the authority to revoke UA if necessary to ensure ongoing safety and regulations. So they, at any time, they can revoke this UA. Same thing happened with the CMA, that is the conditional marketing authorization. This terminology is used by European Union. This is almost the same things, which involves multiple rolling reviews, scientific committee evaluation, decision making, focuses on safety, the rapid evaluation process. So the benefit and limitations, they are crucial for rapid approval in the time of public health emergencies with unmet medical needs, and this approval based on favorable benefit risk ratio. And at the same time, the CMA approved medicines and biologic listed in European Public Assessment Report, and without conditions for up to 5 years during emergencies, that can be extendable indefinitely. But regulatory actions possible if benefits no longer outweigh risk or non-compliance with the requirement. So we have also CDSCO in India implemented this restricted use in emergency. And before this COVID-19, again, I am telling this beautiful rule we have. We are really fortunate, the New Drug and Clinical Trial Rules 2019. There was a scope of this. In response to novel pandemics and public health emergencies, there was a provision of this type of authorization. So accelerated approval for certain drugs, novel vaccines, and we know how this allows foreign produced COVID-19 vaccines approved by reputable regulatory agencies or WHO listed emergency use. So this is expedited approval process. We know that applicant required to initiate a clinical trial within 30 days and assess the safety in the first 100 vaccine recipients for 7 days. So there are benefits like swift availability of critical medicines. We know about remdesivir, we know about tocilizumab, we know about the COVID-19 vaccines. Enables rapid response to urgent healthcare needs while maintaining the safety standards, and it facilitates import and use of foreign produced COVID-19 vaccines, aiding to combat against the pandemic effectively. Yes, I am sorry if you were bored with this long discussion. I am also very tired. I'm feeling tired because of it crossed almost 1 hour. We need to uphold the ethical principles, ensure safe and responsible clinical research. As we are from India, we need to acknowledge our ancient teachers had told about Atmanah Pratikulani Parishuna Samachare. So what we need to do to others, we need to think about that, because we need to place ourselves to their chair and think whether we can do the same thing to us also. So that is something important, and that is the basis of any ethical principles. And regulations govern every stage of clinical trials, nationally and internationally. Compliance and collaboration drive successful research outcomes. So both the compliance and collaboration, these two C is important to have a successful outcome. And applying this regulatory knowledge enhance credibility and ultimately improve patient care. So I must acknowledge my guru, my professor, my guide, Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, because whatever I had discussed, something may be wrong, that is due to the fault of mine. But whatever you may feel beneficial, that is due to my guru, Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi. And again, I want to thank Professor Shiv Prakash for providing me this opportunity, and all those associate sponsors, the Department of Pharmacology at CDSIMER of Bangalore, the JPADR Journal. So I'm really thankful to all of them for providing me the San Clinimed Life Science Private Limited, the main sponsor of this event. So thank you all. And yes, I will be there live on your session. But this, what I want to make you impress upon this subject is quite huge, and we need to know many minute details. So that is why I want to be a little bit descriptive, and that is why I record this, and I want to provide all our participants who are there, will be there in this MPS National Clinical Trial Summit 2023. You can go through it in your leisure time. You know, no need to view this at a stretch. So you can take this. This will be stay in this YouTube channel for a long time. So thank you once again. And here I want to finish this. Thank you.